Montana Territory, late autumn, 1883. The last echo of the departing train dissolved into the cold, brittle air. Clara Ray stood alone on the platform, her gloved hands gripping a worn carpetbag, breath misting white in the sharp wind. Around her, passengers had already dispersed, welcomed by family, embraced by friends, claimed by someone. Everyone but her. No wagon waited. No voice called her name. Clara lowered herself onto a splintered bench, the wood cold against her spine. From her coat pocket she withdrew a letter, its creases soft from too much handling. She had memorized every word. I have a quiet home, a warm hearth, and a place for a kind soul to belong. Signed, Harland Cololton. But no one had come. At the far end of the platform, two young men leaned against a freight barrel, snickering. One spat into the dust. There's the half-blood bookkeeper, he muttered. Thought she'd marry herself a rancher, did she? Clara turned away quickly, heat rising in her cheeks despite the cold. This wasn't the first time. She'd been turned away at the altar, twice, and once even in private, with no witnesses but herself. Always the same whispers. She's part savage. Her mother didn't choose her father. That blood runs deep. Even after she had opened a lending library out near Fort Union, she could not shake the slurs. The wind gusted through the deserted station, sharp and biting. Clara pressed a hand to her eyes, and, for the first time in years, wept openly where someone might see. Small footsteps crunched over the plank. "Are you hurt?" a high, clear voice asked. Clara looked up to see a girl no older than 3, bundled in an oversized wool coat, mittens swinging from a string around her neck, golden curls tumbling from under a knit cap. The child's eyes were wide and solemn. Clara gave a shaky smile. "No, sweetheart. I'm just sad." "Did your daddy say no?" the girl asked. Clara blinked. "No." "Do you have a husband?" Clara shook her head. "Do you have a baby?" Another small shake. "Nobody wants me," Clara murmured before she could stop herself. The little girl stepped closer and, with utter certainty, said, "Can you be my mommy forever?" Clara froze, startled. "Junie." The voice came from behind, deep, quiet, firm. Clara turned. A tall man stood a few paces away, broad-shouldered, coat patched from hard use, hat pulled low over steady, dark eyes. A small supply sack hung from one hand. His other hand rested gently on the child's shoulder. "Sorry," he said evenly. "She's got a soft heart." Clara stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. "No trouble at all. She just surprised me." His gaze lingered on the crumpled letter in her gloved fingers. "You waiting on someone?" "I was," Clara admitted. "But it seems I've been fooled again." The man studied her a long moment, then glanced down at the little girl. The child tugged his sleeve. "You've no place to stay," he said at last. "No," Clara admitted, "but I'll manage." "Come on," he said simply. "It's cold. You can eat, warm yourself. Leave after supper if you want." "I don't even know your name," Clara said. "Luke Harrison." He tipped his head toward the road. "Not far." Clara hesitated only a moment before following him down the path. The road wound through pine and hard ground, crunching underfoot, until they reached a cabin nestled in a shallow hollow, a single room, smoke curling from a crooked chimney, porch boards silvered with age. Luke opened the door without a word. The fire inside glowed warm against plank walls, filling the space with light and shadow. Sparse but clean. One bed in the corner, a table and chair, a rocking chair by the hearth. "You can hang your coat there," Luke said. "I won't stay long," Clara murmured. "That's up to you," he replied, unlacing his boots. "But I didn't invite you to stay forever. Just the night." Clara's cheeks flushed. "I appreciate your honesty." As he stirred a pot on the hearth, he added, "For the record, I didn't write you any letters." Clara blinked. "You're not Harland Cololton?" Luke gave a dry huff, half laugh, half grunt. 16-year-old stable boy works for me sometimes. Likely thought it was funny to play matchmaker with strangers' mail." Clara's grip on her carpet-bag tightened. I see. Junie clambered up onto the bench near the fire. You can sit here, she offered brightly. They ate supper in near silence, Luke saying little, Clara even less, Junie's humming the only cheerful sound. When Clara stood to leave, Junie darted forward and clung to her skirts. No, the child cried. You said you don't have a house. This is one. I'll sleep in the barn, Clara said quickly. Luke shook his head. Cot's yours. I'll sit up. Clara noticed, then, a corner of the room where a small dress hung, beaded in native style. Beside it, a low shelf held a feather, a string of turquoise, and a pouch of dried sage. She was Comanche, Clara said softly. Luke's voice was low. Her name was Wina. Fever took her last winter. I'm sorry. He gave a single nod. Later, when Junie slept curled against the family dog, Luke spoke across the firelight. You can stay a few days, he said. She's calmer with you here. Clara met his gaze. That's all right. I won't ask for more. He nodded once. But as the flames sank low in the hearth, the cabin no longer felt like a place meant for only one. The next morning dawned pale, the light creeping over the ridge like thin gold poured across the hills. A sharp wind rattled the cabin door before Luke shoved it open with his shoulder. He glanced toward the cot by the hearth. Clara was already awake, sitting stiff-backed, boots laced, her carpet-bag packed neatly at her feet. You're up early, Luke said, voice gravelly from sleep. I don't want to impose, Clara replied quickly. I'll be on my way. A small tangle of curls stirred in the corner. Junie yawned, rubbed her eyes and mumbled, No go. She scrambled out from under her quilt and padded barefoot toward Clara, arms lifted. Clara hesitated, then bent to pick her up. The child tucked her face into Clara's shoulder with the easy trust of someone who had already decided who belonged to her. Luke noticed. His gaze lingered on them a moment longer than necessary before he looked away and set a coffee pot on the stove. You can stay through breakfast, he said. No sense walking out hungry. Clara opened her mouth to refuse, but Junie beat her to it. Stay, the little girl ordered, patting Clara's cheek. Eat pancakes. Luke gave a faint snort. She thinks we have pancakes every day. I don't want to trouble you, Clara murmured. Too late, Luke said dryly, pouring coffee. You're already here. They sat at the rough table, steam rising from tin mugs. Clara nibbled at bread and eggs while Luke sipped his coffee in silence. Junie chattered about a stray calf, about crows that stole shiny things, about how she wanted a ribbon like the one Clara wore in her hair. When the meal ended, Clara stood and reached for her bag. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Luke, he interrupted. It's just Luke. She nodded, flustered. Thank you, Luke. I'll head into town, find a room, and start looking for work. There's no decent boarding house in town, Luke said flatly. And not much honest work either. He pushed his chair back. But there's plenty to do here. You help out a few days, earn your keep. Then you can move on if you still want to. Clara hesitated. You'd let me work here? You cook? Yes. Clean? Yes. Good. Then you're hired. Luke rose, pulling on his coat. No speeches. No charity. Just work for pay. I'll handle the stock. You keep the fire going and Junie fed. Clara swallowed hard. All right. Junie clapped her hands. Stay. 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 Luke shot her a warning look. This isn't forever, Junebug. Just until she finds her own place. Clara knelt so she was eye level with the child. Just for a little while, she echoed softly. By midday, Clara had unpacked her few belongings and rolled up her sleeves. She scrubbed the table, beat dust from the blankets, and swept out corners thick with wood smoke. Junie followed her like a shadow, chattering non-stop. Outside, Luke split fence rails and repaired a broken gate hinge. Through the open door, Clara caught glimpses of him, broad back, shoulders working steady under the sun. He glanced in once or twice, but never lingered. In the afternoon, Clara walked to the edge of the pasture with Junie in tow. They found a patch of wild rose hips tangled among the rocks. Clara knelt to pick them, explaining they could be brewed into tea. Junie held out her tiny hands, helping carefully. Luke's voice startled them both. "Watch for thorns," he said, striding up behind. He carried a coil of rope, his expression unreadable. "You're not used to this country. Stay close to the house until you learn it." Clara bristled slightly. "I grew up around hard ground." Luke met her eyes. "Not this hard ground." He glanced at Junie, softened his tone. "She wanders if you don't watch her." Clara nodded, understanding. That evening, after supper, Junie begged for a story. Clara told her a tale about a girl who gathered fireflies in a jar to light her way home. Junie's eyelids drooped before the ending, her head heavy against Clara's arm. Luke watched from his chair, silent, his face unreadable. When Junie was asleep, Clara rose to lay her gently on the cot. She turned and found Luke still watching. "What?" she asked softly. He shook his head once. "Nothing. Just, she hasn't smiled that much in months." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm glad I could help." Luke stood, stretching. "You're welcome to stay longer than a few days. But no promises, no misunderstandings. Just work." "I understand," Clara said. And yet, as the fire burned low and the wind rattled the shutters, neither of them entirely believed it would be so simple. 3 days passed under a pale autumn sun. Clara rose early, lit the fire, cooked breakfast, and swept the cabin until its rough pine walls glowed clean. Junie clung to her side like a burr, chattering and laughing, asking endless questions about ribbons, pies, and why chickens never wore shoes. Luke came and went with the steady rhythm of ranch work, mending fence, hauling hay, checking water trough. He spoke little, but his eyes missed nothing. Sometimes Clara felt his gaze on her as she bent over the hearth or hung laundry to dry in the brittle wind. On the 4th morning, just as Clara was carrying a bucket from the well, a rider appeared on the distant ridge. Dust trailed behind his horse like a warning. Luke came from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His jaw tightened as the stranger approached. The man was thin, his coat frayed, hat pulled low. He reined in at the gate, eyes sharp beneath the brim. "Heard you got yourself some help, Harrison," he called. "Word travels fast." Luke didn't answer right away. "What's it to you, Mason?" "Nothing much." The man's smile was thin as wire. "Just wondering if you're planning to hire more than a cook. Land like yours don't stay quiet long." Clara set the bucket down slowly. She could feel the tension crackling between the two men. "Move along," Luke said flatly. Mason tipped his hat to Clara, his glance lingering too long. "Nice little setup you got here. Careful who you trust." Luke took a step forward, his hand resting on the gatepost. "I said move along." The man chuckled low, turned his horse, and rode off without another word, but the way he looked back over his shoulder made Clara shiver. After Mason disappeared into the hills, Luke strode toward her. "Don't talk to him if he comes around again." "Who is he?" Clara asked. "Trouble," Luke said shortly. "That's all you need to know." They worked in silence the rest of the morning, though Clara noticed Luke checking the horizon more often, his eyes scanning for dust. At noon, Junie tugged Clara's sleeve. "Why's Papa mad?" Clara crouched down. "He's not mad at you. Sometimes grown-ups just worry about things." Luke overheard and gave a faint, weary smile. "You're not wrong," he admitted. That evening, Clara made stew thick with beans and carrot. They ate by lamplight while the wind whistled against the shutters. When Junie was asleep, Clara washed the dishes while Luke sat at the table, silent, deep in thought. Finally, he spoke. "You don't have to stay, Clara. If you've got anywhere else to go, now's the time." She turned, startled. "Why are you saying that?" "Because Mason doesn't just show up for conversation. He's sniffing for weakness. A woman alone here." Luke stopped, jaw tightening again. "I don't want you caught in something you didn't sign up for." Clara set the dishcloth down firmly. "I'm not running off because a stranger glared at us. I can do my work." I can take care of myself. Luke held her gaze a long moment, then gave a small nod. All right. But keep your eyes open. And if I tell you to get inside and bar the door, you do it without arguing. I understand, Clara said. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, a coyote cried somewhere in the dark hills. Clara pulled Junie's quilt higher around her shoulders and wondered what kind of man Mason really was, and what old trouble he carried with him. The morning dawned cold and brittle, a thin skin of frost glazing the troughs and turning every blade of grass silver. Clara's breath puffed white as she stepped outside to shake out the quilt. Junie followed close, humming to herself, dragging her favorite rag doll through the pale dust. Luke was already saddling his horse in the barnyard, cinching the girth with steady, deliberate pulls. Clara noticed he wore his revolver at his side, which he hadn't done the previous mornings. Going out early? She asked, hugging her shawl tighter. Got fence line to check, Luke said shortly. Won't be back till near dark. Keep the doors locked, Clara. Don't open for anyone you don't know. His tone left no room for argument. Clara nodded, though a little knot of worry formed in her chest. You think Mason'll come back? Luke didn't answer directly. He slipped a foot into the stirrup, swung into the saddle, and gave her one long, measuring look. Just promise me you'll do as I say. I promise, she said quietly. The day crawled by slower than any Clara could remember. She scrubbed the floor until the boards shone, kneaded bread, and read Junie a dozen stories to keep her from peeking out the window every 5 minutes. But Clara herself kept glancing toward the ridge, expecting at any moment to see dust rising. It was well after sundown when Luke returned. His horse came in lathered, the smell of sweat and leather strong in the chill air. He swung down, shoulders tight, face grim. Everything all right? Clara asked as he came inside, brushing hay from his coat. Fence is cut. Luke's voice was low, controlled. Someone's been riding the north boundary. Fresh tracks. Clara felt her stomach drop. You think it's him? I don't think, I know, Luke said, setting his hat on the table. Mason's testing me. Seeing if I'm watching my own land. What does he want? Luke looked at her steadily, and for a moment Clara saw the steel behind his calm. Men like Mason don't just want one thing. They want whatever they can take. Junie, sensing the tension, climbed into Clara's lap, clutching her doll. Papa, are we in trouble? Luke softened instantly, kneeling beside his daughter. Not if we're smart, sweetheart. Not if we stay together. That night, after Junie was asleep, Luke sat at the table cleaning his revolver by lantern light. Clara watched him in silence, the rhythmic click of metal on metal steady as a heartbeat. You planning to go after him? She asked finally. I'm planning to make sure he doesn't come after us, Luke replied. There's a difference. Clara hesitated. Be careful. Please. Luke looked up, surprised at the note of genuine worry in her voice. For a moment, the hard lines of his face softened. I always am. Just before midnight, Luke slipped out quietly, boots muffled on the dirt floor, saddle creaking as he mounted up. Clara stood at the window, shawl clutched around her, and watched his shadow ride off into the darkness. Hours passed. The wind moaned across the open prairie, rattling the shutters. Clara dozed fitfully in the chair by the hearth, jerking awake at every sound. Then, far off, faint but unmistakable, came the echo of hoofbeat. A single horse, running hard. Clara leapt up, heart pounding. She opened the door just as Luke rode in at a dead gallop, slid from the saddle, and strode inside. His coat was torn, dust streaking his face, but his eyes were clear and sharp. Pack your things, he said without preamble. We're leaving at first light. Clara froze. What happened? Mason's not alone, Luke said grimly. And they're not just sniffing around anymore. They're coming. Clara didn't sleep. She sat in the half-dark cabin, listening to the slow crackle of the fire and the steady breathing of Junie curled beneath her quilt. Every creak of the wind against the shutters made her fingers tighten around the shawl at her shoulders. Luke hadn't taken off his gun belt. He sat at the table, boots planted solidly on the floor, shoulders bowed as though weighing every possible path through the coming day. The lantern burned low, casting long, uneven shadows across the rough plank walls. "When you said pack," Clara whispered, careful not to wake Junie, "where are we going?" "South," Luke replied, his voice low and even. "There's a line shack near the river. It's hidden. We can hole up there a few days until I figure out where Mason's camped." Clara stood slowly, gathering what little they owned. Her spare dress, Junie's shawl, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, and the baby's small blanket. It wasn't much. Everything she had could be carried in one satchel, and that made her throat tighten. Luke glanced over. "Travel light. No wagon. They'd see us coming a mile off." "What about your land? Your home?" Clara asked. Luke gave a small, grim smile. "A cabin's just wood and nails. I can build another." "I can't build another, Junie." Clara felt her heart twist at the quiet fierceness in his voice. They moved quickly once the first faint streaks of dawn touched the horizon. Luke saddled his horse and an old bay mare for Clara. Junie, still half asleep, whimpered as Luke lifted her up in front of him. "Hush now, sweetheart," he murmured. "We're just going on a little ride." The prairie lay silent in the cold gray light, every shadow sharp, every sound magnified. Clara kept glancing over her shoulder as they rode, half expecting to see riders cresting the ridge behind them. By mid-morning they reached a dry wash choked with cottonwoods. Luke led them off the trail, winding through narrow cuts and rocky ground until the line shack came into view, little more than a weathered log hut tucked into the hillside, roof sagging, door hanging crooked. "It's not pretty," Luke said, helping Clara down, "but no one'll find us here unless they know exactly where to look." Inside, the shack smelled of dust and old wood smoke. Clara swept the floor with a broken broom, while Luke checked the single window and barred the door with a heavy plank. Junie sat on the bunk swinging her legs, trying to stay cheerful though the worry in her father's voice had not gone unnoticed. "Papa," Junie asked finally, "why are we hiding?" Luke knelt beside her. "Because some men out there aren't very nice. But I won't let them hurt you. Understand?" Junie nodded solemnly. "Is Miss Clara scared?" Clara smiled faintly. "A little," she admitted. "But I'm brave too." That night, after Junie fell asleep curled between them for warmth, Clara whispered, "You can't stay here forever. Mason will find you eventually." Luke's jaw tightened in the lamplight. "I know. That's why I'm not just hiding. I'm waiting for my chance." Clara studied him for a long moment, the hard set of his shoulders, the shadow in his eyes. "You're planning to face him." Luke didn't deny it. "If I don't, he'll keep coming. Men like Mason don't stop until somebody makes them." Clara swallowed hard. "Then let me help." "You've helped enough just being here," Luke said quietly. "You've given Junie someone to laugh with. Given me a reason to fight smarter, not just harder." A coyote called in the distance. The night outside pressed close against the walls of the little shack. And somewhere out there in the dark, Mason and his men were riding, closer than either of them wanted to admit.